crawling out of the woodworks to weigh in. Was it the law of unintended consequences or a choreographed affair? Plus, one step forward, two steps backwards. A quorate commission at last and a tender blow. What now at Anniversary Towers? On the kicker tonight, the pulpit, the politics and the pitfalls. On Yvonne's take, 100% transition at zero option. What's missing in between? The punchline searches for sense in the politics. And on the angle tonight, the begged water that doesn't quench the thirst. The memo is that Jamila Mohammed is away tonight, and our sign language gangster in the house is Wilson Mushara.
The protection of the deputy president in terms of its infrastructure is a multi-layered endeavor. The layer that is critical to us is the inner layer, which is essentially the core security ecosystem for His Excellency the Deputy President. And this is occupied by the Presidential Escort Unit. Currently, His Excellency the Deputy President has got 74 officers, that layer, who provide 24/7 protection. The protection of the Deputy President in terms of its infrastructure.
So, Linus, quite a number of layers over there, but many people would say this is perhaps not how this was supposed to turn out.
Not at all. It ended up what I could call an accidental lifestyle audit. It's always been a question of who owns what in this country, and no one in particular than the Deputy President that has faced very many questions with regard to how much he owns, the source of what he owns, and all those questions. But here is what I think happened. What happened was the football equivalent of a back pass, Joe, and a back pass that went wrong. Because only a few days earlier, the Deputy President's allies were saying, summon Matiang'i to Parliament. Let him come and explain this issue of security. And what does Matiang'i and the OP do? They see the opportunity they probably have been waiting for a very, very long time. And they took it big time. Say how many police officers, 257 are deployed to guard the Deputy President. And then you could tell there's something else they wanted to do, which is let out a bit of what they know with regard to what the Deputy President owns. And for me, one of the things that really told that part of the story is when you say a hangar with two hangars and five helicopters. You see, it's a detail that is not very relevant, but you are giving it in a way of providing...
even telling us that the Murumbi farm is 1,000 acres. Yeah. I mean, you could say it's a farm somewhere in Transmara.
Yes, and when you talk of a poultry farm, I don't think the policemen are actually deployed inside the chicken house, which is the impression the submission to Parliament creates. It could be a huge farm where then there is a gate where one would guess there'll be a security officer or two at the place. But the impression created is these chicken are guarded right there by bodyguards. And you can imagine how difficult it is to follow a chicken.
With a gun.
But overall, but overall, Joe here, Fred Matiang'i, the CS for Interior, took the opportunity that OP has probably been waiting for a long time, and they put this matter to rest as far as the question of security is concerned. When you look at the last few days, look at the comments today, the issue is now shifting from security to wealth. Yeah. So the conversation is changing.
Quite interesting, and you could see there was it wasn't entirely accidental. I mean, like Lina says, Yvonne, someone saw a through pass and
And took it,
ran
with it gleefully.
Right. In a sense, the security conversation took on a decidedly political dimension. And right now, we have gone into a very different realm.
We have, and Alina said, it was an accidental bypass. Nothing about this seemed accidental. Let me just, give some context. So first of all, the relationship between the Minister of Interior, particularly the CS and the PS, and the members of Parliament has been a rather testy one throughout, his tenure at the time. In fact, on so many occasions, MPs have complained about the fact that they have summoned the CS for Interior and the PS, and they hardly show up. In fact, in just March this year, the MPs themselves, created a walkout, and they left and said, how many times have we called these guys? In fact, they said they have called them on several occasions. At the very last minute, no reason is given. They don't come. The only time they do make their way to Parliament is perhaps when there's a budget. When they're presenting their budget to the House. Months earlier, they've clashed with the Senate Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. Skipping summons. But then what do we see in this instance? We see the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, the PS for Interior, and all the senior officers in the security. By the way, they were in full uniform. It was a show of might. And this then tells you when they want to appear. There was clearly a reason here. There was absolutely nothing accidental about this.
It was the security of the whole deputy president of this country they were dealing with. So
and they have, but they have been actually summoned on a number of other issues, the Huduma number project, a number of other issues they have skipped and chosen to snub them. Members of Parliament have felt slighted, they felt snubbed, but they were not snubbed and they were not slighted in this particular instance to discuss it. Not that it is not a matter of national interest or indeed national security, but it was just telling that, they were here, they were present, they were in full force, and they had answers to almost all the questions that the MPs raised, which is very unlike what we have seen, the relationship between the two. And so make of that what you will.
But in any event, Francis, the point is that the security issue is really not what we are talking about now, and perhaps that is what this was intended to be, because I think initially when this thing happened, and we talked a little bit about it last week, it was more about someone trying to compromise the security of the deputy president. It was more about this is part of the whole political scheme to humiliate, frustrate, and all of that. And suddenly what we are now seeing is some people today even saying, well, what is the problem with the wealth? Kama Mungu amebariki mtu, we can't have a poor president. And a very interesting direction that this has taken.
And it was expected. I would say expected because right from last week when we started discussing this matter about the withdrawal of GSU and replacement by APs, at that point it was a security issue, though we all knew there was a political element to it. And the easier way to know there was a political element to it, look at the interview we did with the president the other Monday. Look at the sentiments by CS Mushero in Limuru. And a number of times, some of the cabinet secretaries have had a direct go at the deputy president. You remember CS Tobiko the other day? And every so often, once in a while, you will hear the PS Interior and the CS Interior say they may not necessarily mention the deputy president by name, but by inference, you can know who they are referring to. Some of the things that the CS said yesterday could not have been said in a press conference. They could not have been said in a press statement. And so the opportunity presented itself at a place that is privileged, a place like Parliament, where whatever you say is on record, is privileged information, and you have some sort of legal protection. Because out here, probably, maybe the deputy president would have taken the route of, let's say, suing the CS for defamation or whichever, or maybe it would have taken a different direction. But here is a parliamentary opportunity, a parliamentary process. A committee of the House is an extension of the House. So whatever happens in a committee of Parliament is similar to what would happen in a plenary session in the chambers of Parliament. And so, first, parliamentary privilege. Two, you are able now to say quite a number of things that you would not necessarily say in a press conference. And number three, there was also an opportunity, as Lina says, to divert the whole discussion from the number of security officers that the Deputy President had, whether it had been a downgrade or not, to now introduce another topic of what does the Deputy President own. And I would think this was to try and answer another question. Is the Deputy President a hustler? And who is a hustler in this case? And that explains why today the Deputy President responded to this by saying, this was a lifestyle audit that they conducted on me. 70% of what they said was correct. 30% was not correct. Actually, let me give them some more information. That's when he told us about the 400,000 shares in Safaricom, the 80,000 shares at Kenya Airways. You know, those details that, you know, came out. And then, interestingly, he said something else that I found also quite telling, that now the CS yesterday enabled the hustler nation to open up the discussion about who is a hustler. That a hustler is not necessarily a poor person, but a person who has ambitions to try.
And I think we have that sound. We can play it.
Sasa hawa wametusaidia ndio ijulikane wazi, sio lazima ukue maskini ndio ukue hustler. Hustler is a different thing. Na hustler haitakuwa vita kati ya watu maskini na tajiri. So wametusaidia katika hiyo kufafanua ya kwamba huyu William Ruto sio mtu maskini, ako na mali. Na yeye ni hustler. Kumaanisha sio lazima uwe maskini ndio ukue hustler. Hustler ni kumaanisha unaweza kupanda ngazi uende juu.
You see now, that discussion introduces, the security issue introduced two more discussions, wealth and the hustler narrative. And this is as a consequence of what had happened previously. You will remember when this issue came up, it was said that it was introducing a class war. So the unintended consequences of the security downgrade, withdrawal, replacement, whatever you call it, has introduced two more fundamental topics, which I think will dominate discussions, political discussions this weekend.
But in my view, it does introduce a conundrum, as it were, for the hustler team, because I mean the dominant narrative in there has been that this is a team that is looking out for mtu mudogo. In fact, the idea has been that this time round, Mama Mboga hapa chini ndio ataunda serikali. So there's this idea that has been there, and there are many people in this country who are downtrodden, they are the lowly in society and all of that, who have never been involved in this conversation that is rich people are having in this country. So that actually this conversation about politics in our country has been about the rich or people who are privileged sitting somewhere and basically making decisions on behalf of the rest of the people and forming government and all of that. So I think there's a sense in which it has created a crisis of definition in the hustler camp about what this hustler truly means, because the definitions by inference that has been given all along, if you think about it, has been this idea of these people who are left out on the mainstream, out of the mainstream economy, and they are struggling out there on the periphery, and everybody, the few people who are privileged, who have positions, are having it all. So I think there's something that's going to happen there in terms of going back to the drawing board to figure out what this really means. But there's something else which I think came up, which is likely to be interesting to see how it is tackled. I mean, there is a question of land. Obviously, in the conversation that Fred Matiang'i had with members of parliament, perhaps the intention would have been to demonstrate that this person that we're talking about is actually a wealthy Kenyan, is not the poor person or the hustler as it's been understood that he's been saying he is. But in so doing, the question of land came up. And I think today I had Rigathi Gachagua talking about it in very interesting terms, saying that we'll now need to start asking questions about who owns the previous Mau Mau land and everything. And Linus, this is an emotive thing that has never been resolved. And some people say, when you ask questions, are you ready to answer them? Are you ready for the answers that might come? Because I think there is no greater unresolved question than land in this country. And it is not just land, Mau Mau and everything. There will be all the, previous white settler farms in the Rift Valley and other places. And before Linus also starts asking where all the land that belonged to the Maasai went to, I'm not too sure that this is a conversation that can end with what Rigathi Gachagua was talking about.
Maybe I should start with the question of where all the Maasai land went.
If you go that direction, I think we could be evicted from this set because all of this apparently was...
Yes, right? Absolutely.
Right, but here is my interpretation of what we saw the DP's allies doing today when they started making reference to land. When they make reference to land, they are only saying one thing, actually, that we are going to also question the land owned by the family of President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That is the simple decoding of what Rigathi Gachagua is saying, and the rest of the DPs. Even Wamushomba. Yes. They are just saying, we are also going to say, let's have this discussion about land. By Machangi's count, the DP is at just over 18,000 acres of land right now. And so what you will see, and you've seen in the dirty war in the social media, sharing of the supposed number of security officers the president has versus the ones that the DP has, and also the question of land. We're going to see a lot of this coming out. But to the point that you had raised earlier on the issue of the hustler narrative, the hustler narrative had a bad night yesterday. That is for a fact. Because you wake up to the kind of headlines that you saw in the media today, very harsh. You saw Taifa Leo saying, hustler bandia. Daily Nation saying, Matiang'i unmasked. DP Ruto. And when you go to these journalistic terms, they are strictly aligned to what has really happened. Very, very tough thing sometimes, when you say hustler bandia, but translate it to what really transpired yesterday. It's the same thing as what the Daily Nation is saying, which is unmasking that this DP has been saying, I am a hustler. And a hustler means a poor person, a man that doesn't own much. But then, Matiang'i comes and produces 2 hangars and inside it 5 helicopters and things like that. So it was a bad night, which is why we didn't see a strong reaction yesterday, except a statement by David Mugonyi, a very long, wordy statement about abuse of parliamentary process and things like that. Meaning then last night there was some regrouping. And what did the regrouping produce? It produced a very disciplined kind of messaging. When you watch the UDA or Hustler Brigade speaking, they, in my view, I could be wrong, they could have sessions to just basically go through what they should say. Because look at what consistently came out today. And I want us to listen to Ishungwa and the Nyeri women rep for a moment.
We must refocus our attention from William Ruto and the Hustler Nation to the Big Four agenda. Tuliwaambia
Mungu akibarikiwa, si ni Mungu amembariki. Na sasa sisi tukiwa wa Kenya, tungetaka kuchagua president mwenye hana kitu. Si tunataka yule president ako na kitu.
You are now, the narrative is embrace the wealth now that it has been spoken of. Don't deny it anymore, embrace it. And we in media, and this goes to basically the entire media, know very well how difficult it has been to raise questions about the DP's properties. And we know the Weston story, very difficult story. A lot of editors and journalists have landed into trouble for associating the hotel with the DP. You know, it was very, very strongly denied that he has anything to do with that hotel. But then, last night, in my view, and I'm just trying to assess or analyze what I believe took place. You know, they look at this. Parliamentary committee receives what is actually quite damning information in terms of what the DP owns and how much security is deployed around it. And they decide, no, it makes no use denying any further, which is why the DP also comes and says, you know, I own this. We got some figures today. I don't know whether we have that on just how much poultry there is in some farms.
200,000.
Do we have that? There you are. And the DP spoke of 200,000 chicken that produce 150,000 eggs
per day.
You know, my problem with the exactitudes, you know, 150,000 out of 200
No, I mean, like, not all of them lay eggs every day. So out of the 200,000, some 150,000 lay eggs, sold at 10 bob a piece, I would imagine, because he said that they bring 1.5 million a day.
Right. And basically, this is the first time we have the DP ever admitting that he has money. He has put even figures in terms of a daily generation of 1.5 million shillings from the poultry, and he also spoke about shares and things.
400,000 at Safaricom, 80,000 I think at QQ.
Yes. So back to the narrative. The narrative is in shreds because hustler means poor, hustler means humble, hustler means little, and
struggling, yes,
struggling and all that. This is definitely not the definition of a hustler.
If one he says 70% accurate, but I mean, to the best of my recollection, he only denied the ADC farm in like Kipia.
Right.
15,000
Unless it was the 70% in terms of acreage, but
and that's the thing about it, because it's always been, you know, the hustler versus the dynasty, and saying there are those who have money and who have access to capital, be it social or otherwise, and therefore are, you know,
bottom up,
right? And then now you get this, okay, so, you know, even a hustler can have money, na sio lazima, you know, akwe maskini. And so now, where does he fall? Is he, you know, in the dynasty that has the wealth, or is it, you know, the hustler narrative that is being propagated? And I think now with this one, it's your back is against the wall. And like we're saying, it's going to be the season of revelations. So wakirusha tunarusha, you know, and a lot of that propaganda is going to happen, you know, on social media, like we saw. Now there was, you know, a table list of the list of properties that the president owns, and then on this side, you know, there continues to be revelations. But at the end of the day, the person that now really has his back against the wall and really needs to talk about, you know, what you own. And I know they were saying that, you know, it's a breach of security, but, you know, you get to the point where at the end of the day, when you are running for public office, a lot of these things are questions that you're going to be asked. Many of us remember in 2013, I believe, during the presidential debates, was it? And 2017 as well. But President Uhuru Kenyatta was put to task over the land that, you know, he owns, you know, Taita Taveta. You were the one who asked him that question. Yes, in 2013. And, you know, raising that issue. And
he did give some figures.
Yes, and said it was family.
He did give 30,000 acres at the time, and said it was family. It wasn't his particularly. And this is what elections does. Then it starts to, you know, bring up, you know, a lot of these issues. But then, you know, what happens now? The thing about these revelations, you would honestly think the election is happening in a month or two. Like, it's really heated, and, you know, for Kenyans to think this is going to come up, you know, again and again over the next 11 months or so now. You know, so just to brace ourselves, and for quite a bit that's going to be happening on social media and revelations. Some of them true, some of them not.
And, the issue of that wealth declaration, remember? Those forms are supposed to be, deposited to Parliament, I believe. All of these issues that now start to come up. Remember when the President and his deputy said they were taking a pay cut? All of these things that are very difficult to ascertain. Now they're coming up, because it's the political silly season, if you like. So it'll be a very interesting, turn and phase of that, and re-engineering of narratives and re-engineering of political sloganeering, and having to, think that through again and again, and, adjust and readjust.
Joe, there's no more difficult discussion than trying to access the wealth declaration forms that are signed by public officers when they are getting in, especially those who are getting into public office. Yeah. Try and get a copy of the wealth declaration forms. It is so difficult. Why? Because you go, declare your wealth, put it in an envelope that remains sealed. Yep. So sometimes it defeats the purpose of declaring that wealth, because if it is hidden, then what is being declared? And ordinarily it was meant to give us a difference of, at your point of entry into a public office, for example, how much did you own? So that people can be able to make a comparison when you're exiting. How much do you own?
How much did you acquire?
How much did you acquire in that period? And maybe did you use public resources to acquire property for private use and ownership? That is usually the first question. And every time this question has been raised, especially on the president, on the deputy president, and all those leaders, they keep telling us, go to EACC, go to Parliament, ask them to give you a copy. You will not get that copy. And so the unintended consequences, once again, of the sitting yesterday in Parliament was to bring out some of these resources. And today, the deputy president had a choice to either completely deny or admit that, yes, this is property that I own. And he chose the latter, though with a rider that some of the properties that were listed don't belong to me. Rest it there. Now the question has been, when the hustler narrative story first came up, the opponents of the deputy president immediately described it, characterized it as a haves versus have-nots kind of a discussion. And so what the deputy president is trying to do today is to defend the hustler narrative, saying it is not necessarily a question or a contest between those who have and those who do not have. So he was playing defense today as opposed to offensive, yeah? And I would think his opponents will try and find something else to do in relation to this. Thirdly, and most fundamentally, I look at it as a continuation of the bad blood between the president and the deputy president, because I would say this. It is not possible for the CS to go to Parliament yesterday like he did and unleash all this information. Why was this information not unleashed between 2013 and 2017? So there's a political reason for it,
even the way
which
he spoke,
is consequential to the relationship between the president
even the way
and the deputy.
It referred to the whole thing of the complaints that have been there about the... Because we have two interesting sound bites that I would like us to go to. One, there is the DP, because it all started with all these complaints, and after a day or two, the DP kind of started making light of it, like, even if those APs are needed somewhere, you can get me
G4S.
even G4S. And then I think we can play that and then follow it up with what the CS was saying in Parliament yesterday about sympathy.
Na hata ikipatikana kazi ya AP, ikitokea kazi ingine ambayo imetokea ya muhimu kwa Wakenya wengine ambao wako na matatizo, wanaweza hata kulete G4S, wanaweza kunisaidia hapo nyumbani.
The politics of sympathy addiction, everything is about sympathy. Sympathize with me. I'm dying. I'm being finished. The government is switching off the sun and the moon and so on.
Linus.
Okay, Joe. Interesting turn there. Let's remember there are two sides to this thing. First, there was the security bit that then ceded ground to wealth, the wealth question, very, very related. And the DP was initially complaining about, remember the source of all this was the withdrawal or replacement of the GSU with the APs. And he complained that this is unprocedural, and we all remember the letter from from his communications person, which was dismissed yesterday by the CS, that it's something that went on the social media, so we had nothing to do with it. So the CS sought to, first of all, paint the DP as dishonest on the issue of security. That, you are talking of G4S, that level, it's when you have 121 APs, 74 presidential escort unit, personnel, 5 GSU, 6 DCI. Like Francis was talking about earlier, what happens in government, and we've seen it with corruption cases, is there is that famous file they talk of, that you have a file of somebody and a lot about a particular officer. And that really should be taken as fact when it comes to operations in government. Government is not run by saints. It's run by people who have a lot of faults, a lot of things to hide and all that.
And interests.
Yeah, and interests. And so there is a silent rule, keep quiet and I'll keep quiet.
Yeah.
Play ball and we'll play ball. Because the other interpretation I would give to what the CS Interior was doing yesterday was, this is a warning shot to DP that, we can start unleashing some of these things. When it comes to wealth, and the purpose of wealth declaration was to ensure that there is no illicit acquisition of wealth or benefit from public funds. Let's not be surprised if this battle continues and goes to the next phase. Remember earlier on, these two sides were talking of politicization of the war on corruption. I see it in the same line, basically, because there is so much officials in government know about each other. So it's just a question of, when are you not on this side? And I want us to listen to Matiang'i when he speaks of propaganda.
This issue has been characterized by some very juvenile activism, petty propagandism, and so on. And the facts are lost in that process. And we don't want, because we are respectful of the institutions that we work, we don't want to go that direction. And we are not going to respond to those kinds of antics. We will do the work that we have been asked to do. That's why you have noticed that there hasn't been any correspondence from any one of us, including our Inspector General of Police.
The point in reference here is the social media, basically. Because one thing that the DP allies have been very ruthless and good at is the use of social media, with Dennis Itumbi running the so-called Hustler Intelligence Bureau.
Hustler Nation Intelligence Bureau.
Yes, and you can see that the CS is coming under pressure from that. I think that was reference to what goes on in the social media with regard to what Dennis Itumbi and his team do, posting things there, and of course making very very bad characterizations of the CS and other people. Basically, we saw the CS also respond to that. And when he says we are not going to respond to that, the Inspector General of Police is not going to respond to that. To respond to that, I think he's responding to the social media element of this fight.
And we need to take a break.
Yeah,
so
as we take that, I wanted to add something small that I don't know whether many people took note of it. This was a session attended by the CS, the PS, the Inspector General of Police, the 2 deputies, the DCI, top security officers. The issue that had been raised was operational, purely operational. Deployment, withdrawal, replacement, purely operational. But none of those officers spoke about it. All this was left to the CS. And the CS and the ministry ordinarily would be offering policy guidelines, policy direction on matters national security. Operations belong to the Inspector General of Police and the various departments. But you realize they didn't speak. It is the CS who did all the speaking, did all the answering of questions. So shows you that the target was clear, the messaging was also very clear. And I would even probably think in hindsight, was the withdrawal of the GSU officers and replacement with AP a trap? To trigger this course trigger the response and then offer an opportunity for the security committee to summon the CS so that he can come and spill the beans in a privileged environment such as Parliament.
But because I just wanted to add, because security is definitely always something that is a politicized issue in this country, and every time you have certain individuals who say things that people in power and in a position of control over certain issues like security do not like, then security is the first thing that is withdrawn, as we have said across this table, as a warning shot. Many will remember, even with Raila Odinga, Kalonzo Musyoka back in the day, on several occasions have had their security withdrawn. Even Kimani Ichung'wah and I believe Ferdinand Waititu, who was then governor of Kiambu County, about 2 years ago, around 2019, had their security withdrawn at the time when the situation between the president and the deputy president and their respective allies was deteriorating. And it's interesting how things can change very quickly in this country. Many will remember that at the time when things were on the other side, way before the handshake, when Raila and Kalonzo had their security withdrawn, and they did call out the cabinet secretary for Interior, for this very issue. What did guess who was on the other side? To his defense. And guess who came to the defense of the cabinet secretary, Fred Matiang'i? Let's listen to Dr. William Ruto on that issue back in the day. This was what he had to say about Matiang'i.
Wachana na Matiang'i. Matiang'i kazi yake ni kuhakikisha ya kwamba kuna ulinzi wa kutosha.
How fast things change in this country.
Very, 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 very interesting. And I think that we need to take that. Linus, then you take us to the break.
Just a quick observation. The summons were to the office of the president. And procedurally, that will be the head of that ministry, and that is CS Matiang'i. And that is the context under which he appeared in the House. The summons were not, they could have decided to summon operational chiefs like the IGP, but when you look at it very clearly, and even from the DP's own allies, the person they wanted
was the
when Cherargei spoke, it said, Senator Cherargei spoke and said, we want CS Interior to come and explain. And I think it's an invitation.
And I think in hindsight, it is possible to even think that because CS Matiang'i has not honored many of those things, perhaps it was a bluff, that maybe he will not come. Then they say, oh, Ata tulimuita, and he probably just called their bluff and say, let's see what happens.
But Joe, look at the composition of the National Assembly Security Committee. It will be very important to look at the membership. That composition gives you an answer to a few of the questions.
All right, News Gang takes a break. We'll be right back with more discussions.